Would you please give a warm welcome to Mr. Howard Olson? Thank you so very much. Hey, listen, I just want to run a quick test here. With the hollowness of that mic, can everybody hear me fine?
Yes.
I don't need a mic? Everything's good? All right, well, if it's good with you, it's also good with me. Let me hook this thing up. Apparently, they're going to record this. Some of you may want to come back and review it. So, yeah, my name is Howard Olson, as Greg has kind of so graciously introduced me. We've been friends. We've been friends a long time. I think I met him back in around 2004, actually at a speaking engagement, and we became really fast friends since that time. And, you know, Greg and I have done a few things business-wise over the years, but mostly we've just been really good friends. And back in, I think it was back in 2014, Greg came to me, and, you know, Greg has done all kinds of different network marketing enterprises, and I tend to have a resistance to those things. And so Greg had come to me and said, hey, listen, I got this thing I want you to look at called Karatbars, and I just thought that was going to be another one of his lotions, potions, maybe some kind of, I actually thought it was a nutritional company that, you know, would take the power of beta-carotene, great carrot. I said, man, I don't want anything to do with it. And I completely rejected it. But he persisted, and so there's a lesson in the power of persistence. He came at me about 3 or 4 times, and he finally came to me after probably my 4th rejection, and simply said, listen, you're a professional speaker, I'm a professional speaker, I'm doing a presentation, would you come and would you look and just give me your critique on it? I said, all right, under one condition. I still had no idea really what this was all about. I said, under one condition, I'll come and I'll take a look, but if I leave and I tell you I never want to hear about this again, you have to respect that, okay? Do we have a deal? He said, yeah, we have a deal. So I came out. I had no idea that Karatbars was actually about gold. I mean, I had very little knowledge about it, but one of the things that's, I think, important to understand my background, I've got a pretty profound knowledge of gold. I read a book back in 2001 that literally, it changed my life in many ways. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And that book, when I say it changed my life, it wasn't like I had this life-transforming moment. What that book did for me is it basically chronicled the history of the Federal Reserve, how it was created, the fact that it's not a bank, it's not federal, it's not a government institution, it holds nothing in reserve, and I had always believed it was a national bank owned by the U.S. And this book, it chronicled not just how they created it, but how they got the public to buy it. And when I read that book, and it showed facts, and it gave documented history of this whole thing, it was almost like the veil was being pulled back, and I was beginning to see a level of truth and how some of the things that I had thought I believed to be true, in fact, weren't. And that took me down a journey of really beginning to question a lot of things. Now, prior to reading that book, I had also been a fairly strong gold aficionado. I lived in Hong Kong for a number of years. I lived in Toronto and Miami and Hong Kong and Chicago and San Francisco. I've lived in a lot of places for more than just a couple of weeks or months. I mean, I've been resident in these places. And the one thing that I noticed, already going back as early as '95, as my income was really beginning to rise, I was even noticing that even as my income was rising and my lifestyle was also increasing, on a yearly basis, the dollars that I had, they weren't going as far. So I began to recognize this pattern with this thing called inflation. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew something was going on. And I had always known about gold and gold holding its value, and so I started buying gold in small denominations already back as early as 1995. When I read The Creature from Jekyll Island, began to understand how the banking system operates, the true nature of inflation, and all those other things, I started acquiring more and more of it. And, you know, if I had a good pay week, I'd have a good gold accumulation week. And if I had a low pay week, I'd have a low gold accumulation week. But every week, I had some form of gold accumulation. And I just began to see gold as inflation-proof money. So when Greg showed me this Karatbars, and I came out to that presentation this morning, and then I realized it was a presentation on gold and how to acquire it, I agreed already with a lot of what they were talking about. And what I appreciated the most was that, you know, one of the things that you'll notice when you come into a network marketing environment, there tends to be a lot of hype in the air. There tends to be a lot of, I would just call it over-exuberant enthusiasm, like something that's so exuberant and enthusiastic that there's something unnatural about it. That makes me quiver. I don't like it. And the one thing that I noticed on that morning that I showed up is that there was none of that in the room. I hope you're sensing some of that here today. This is a very business-like thing. And what I loved about it is that I already knew gold, I understood gold, I believed in gold, and I understood that a lot of people didn't understand it. And I looked at Karatbars as an opportunity to do 2 things. To educate a lot of people about what's really going on in the world, and then use the power of that education to actually build a business out of it while doing no harm to anybody else. And so that was very appealing to me, and that's how my journey at Karatbars really began. And so I've been involved since the end of 2014, early 2015, and I'm still a large believer in gold. And what I want to do for you today, now, so for some of you that have been around for a while, some of what I'm going to share with you, you will already know that. So this is going to be a benefit to the new guests, and for those that maybe haven't done a deep dive on this, I've recognized 4 converging trends. Now, I'm not going to have a chance to go deep on all of them because of the limitation of time here, but I want to make a case for gold. I want to help you understand. Listen, let me ask you this. I'm just going to stop for a second. If I were to say to you that everything is well with the world today, would you agree with that statement, or you say, man, you're off your crocker, everything is not well with the world today? True or false? Yeah, false. But if I were to ask you, could you identify and put your finger on what exactly is wrong with it? Could you do it? Some of you could, or some of you think you can. Then listen, there's so many moving parts to this that there is no one answer. But you know, money itself is not evil, but the love of money is the root of all evil. And I'm going to talk to you, I want to help connect a couple of dots today that'll help you understand the true nature of inflation, why it's getting harder and harder, and what one of the solutions to that is. All right? And then I'm going to just end that. Last week when we were here, Robin made a great presentation on how to protect yourself from the coming financial storm. And I do believe that there are storm clouds on the horizon. In fact, I don't even think they're on the horizon. I think they're here. I fully believe in my heart of hearts that they're here. And what I'm going to share with you today is not a gloom and doom presentation. It's not that at all. My heart is full of love and joy and greater positive expectation than I've probably ever had in my lifetime. But the thing is, there are storm clouds on the horizon, but you don't know what to do with them if you don't understand. And so the purpose of what we're all going to cumulatively share with you today is to educate you, because in that, knowledge is power, and when you actually know what's going on, you can actually not just survive, you can thrive, and that is our goal. But I cannot show you the solution to a problem if you don't first understand the problem. And so some of you have a pretty good understanding of that. Some of you have a lesser understanding of that. And for some of you, you might be hearing this for the first time. So this is for the benefit of all of you, mostly for the ones who have never seen this before, and to reinforce that. Okay, does that make sense? And at the end, I'm just going to pepper just a couple of converging trends that I see, why I think what we're talking about here makes a lot of sense. And this is coming from somebody that still acquires gold every single week and has a significant holding in gold-backed digital assets. So I don't like the term cryptocurrency. I like to think of them as digital assets, gold-backed digital assets. All right, so why gold, why now? So here's what I want to do. I just want to take you through this. All right, so that's a little bit of my background. We all remember going to school, right? Okay, and you go to school, we learn the 3 R's. Remember what the 3 R's are? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. My question to you is, okay, we learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, but who taught you about money? Nobody. Well, that's true, nobody. But actually, somebody did. Who taught you about money? Actually, it's the banks. For some of us, we had parents, and my parents tried to teach me, but they didn't do a really good job of it because they taught me based on their limited understandings. Some of us had mentors. But I want you to think about this. We go to high school, okay, and we just graduate, and the first thing we're taught how to do is how to fill in an application to get a credit card. What is a credit card? It is a plastic debt instrument. And then we get our first job, and then we learn how to fill in our car loan and get a car loan, and then our income goes up, and so some of millennials may be in a different place, but for most of us in this room of our generation, then we learn how to get a mortgage. And then we learn how to get a line of credit. And then we learn how to, how to get leverage, how to take line of credit loans so that we can feed our retirement accounts. Our entire life, we have been educated by the financial institutions whose very vested interest is in selling us their debt products. And we wonder why we have such a debt problem. They're the ones who have educated us. Now, this is not an anti-bank message. I just want you to understand where this has come from, right? So this is what it's all about. Now, when you think about most Canadians, Americans, people around the world, do you think they have a plan to get themselves out of debt and have the ability to retire in the next 3, 5, maybe 10, 8 years? Do you? The majority of them? I don't think so. I don't think so. I know the people I talk to, it's getting tougher and tougher. Now, what about you? Now, some of you have a pretty good retirement plan. But how's the plan actually working for you? I mean, inflation is on the rise. I mean, the stock market's at an all-time high. But how long is that going to go? All right, what's going to happen there? And so my message to you is, listen, if this applies to you, take heed in what I'm going to share. And if this does not apply to you, take heed in what I'm going to share, because you probably know somebody to whom this applies. and it's your opportunity to help them. All right, so that's really what I want to go like that. So just want to share with you a couple numbers. They don't lie. These are all current. I calculated them this afternoon. I took a basket of every, now here's the thing. Our governments, the United States, Canada, the Euro, we're being told constantly that our cost of living or the inflation rate is 2%, right? We've all heard that. Would you agree that it's 2%? I mean, if you have $100 in your pocket today, will it buy you more or less a year from now? The $100 you had in your pocket 2 years ago, what does it do for you today? It buys you significantly less, doesn't it? In fact, if you listen to people like Lynette Zhang and you go to places like Shadow Stats where they keep real statistics according to the way they were always kept from the 70s up to the 80s until they started cooking the books and doctoring the way they keep the statistics, the real rate of inflation is 10% per year for the last 10 years. Now, I'm going to prove this to you because these are real numbers. I calculated. I took a basket of goods. Not, listen, a TV may have gone down, but you buy one TV every 10 to 15 years. So that's a garbage number. You have to look at the things that you spend your money on every single day. So I took a bread, I took 1980, 2000, right up to 2019. So a loaf of bread has gone from 52 cents to $4.99. That's almost 1,000% increase. This is stuff we spend our money on every day. Movie tickets, $2.69 up to $12.99, 483% increase. Housing, well, we all know the story here, right? It's getting less and less affordable. In fact, I tell you what I did with mine. I sold it at the peak of the market, and I got out because every bubble will eventually pop, and I'm not here to, but for me, it was the right thing to do, and I took that cash and I put it into a safe place until what I believe is the inevitable happens, and then I come back into the market again. Postage stamps, now we may not use a lot of them, but this is the daily expenditure thing, 15 cents to $1.20, 800%, and a gallon of milk has gone from $1.09 to $5.78. That's another 500% increase. Now let me ask you a question. Have you seen a 250 to 1,000% increase in the wages that you bring home in the last decade? No! And this is why it's getting harder and harder to get ahead. This is why we're, finding it difficult to prepare for our retirements and all these other things. And the real statistics, our wages, when adjusted for inflation, have been in decline since 1970. This is a real statistic, right off the Department of Treasury's own website. In fact, our earning in real dollars has decreased $2,100 since 2009, and it's down $3,600 since 2001. When you income adjust, when you look at what your increases have been versus the inflation versus the purchasing power, that's what we've lost just in the last 10 years. All right, and this is why it's getting more and more difficult to get ahead. That's the problem. So inflation is a very real phenomenon, and it's not 2%. And the real numbers, the things that we spend our money on, continues to prove it. And I'll just put it this way. It is impossible to outrun exponential inflation on our declining linear incomes. You can't do it, which is why so many people, why is it getting harder and harder? And we start to blame, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. There are economic circumstances which are conspiring against the majority of us, but the minute you understand what they are, you can then begin to understand what the solution to that is, because there is an answer, a really logical, a simple answer. But you'll never understand the answer if you don't first understand the problem, which is the purpose of what I want to share with you here today. Now, most people think that inflation is an increase in the cost of goods. Okay, the bread was $1.09, that's inflation. No, listen. That is the symptom. The increase in the price of goods is the symptom that we see. Like when you have a cold and you have a sniffle, is the problem the sniffle? No, the problem is you've got a virus that created a cold, and the sniffle is the symptom. The rise in price that we see is the symptom. The underlying cause, the problem is our currency or the money that we use is becoming worth less and less with each day. Now, a simple example. Many of you have seen this, but I'm going to show it to you in a couple different ways this morning or this afternoon. All right? So, listen, let's just go back. 2,000 years ago, they didn't wear suits. And this is not, I'm not trying to be gender specific. It's just an example we can all relate to, okay? So in this day and age of political and gender correctness and the language police, listen, I'm going to use this because we can relate to it, okay? All right. So 2,000 years ago, we know that the suit of the day, a formal, a proper man's suit, would have been a toga, a robe, a fine belt, and a pair of fine leather sandals. And we know, you can go into any historical or biblical text, and we know that the price of that outfit was exactly 1 gold coin or an ounce of gold. Now we can fast forward up to 1960. Now 1960 they weren't wearing togas anymore unless you were, you know, in a frat house, at a toga party or something, right? But the suit of the day then, it was a pair of slacks, it was a shirt, a tie, a belt, okay, a jacket, pair of leather shoes, and that was your outfit. And what was the price of, what was an ounce of gold back then? It was $28 an ounce. And what was the price of that outfit in 1960? About 28 bucks. And with money to spare to go on a date and get to the movie theater. Fast forward today. If you wanted to take yourself down to the Hudson Bay, get a decent suit. Now I'm not talking about like an Armani or something like that where you know you're going to pay 10 grand for the suit, but you want a good suit with a good shirt, with a good tie, with a good pair of shoes, and a good belt. What's that outfit going to cost you? I can tell you, right? The suit's probably going to be somewhere between $8 and $1,000. A decent pair of shoes, like these shoes right here, they're 250 bucks. That's what it is. The belt's 100. Add it up. How much did that outfit just cost me with a nice suit? About 1,800 bucks. And what's the ounce of gold today? In Canadian dollars, about 1,800 bucks. In US dollars, 1,200 bucks. And what I want to demonstrate with this example is that the price of the suit in 2,000 years has not budged 1 inch when measured in gold, which is stable money. What has changed is the value of the currency. Because the more of this stuff that they print, the less each unit printed is worth. And so it takes more the ounce of gold, it also takes more of these dollars to get the thing that you want to buy. But if you measure the thing that you want to buy in gold, it doesn't change over time. And I'm going to cut this for you a couple of different ways so you can see that we're not just inventing this, okay? So it's important that you get this. Inflation, when looked at through the lens of an increase in price, that's the symptom. The problem is our money is worth less. Why? Why? How does it happen? It's because today we deal with something called a fiat currency. And a fiat currency is basically money which is backed by nothing, which we all use simply because it's been decreed by the government that we must. And here's the problem. They just keep printing it and printing it and printing it and printing it, and the more they print, each unit is worth less. Do you follow my logic so far? So I'm going to show you how this works. All right, now I'm not going to take you through this whole thing, but basically the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. Okay, that's when the Fed came on the scene, started issuing these US dollars. And back in 1913, if you measured the purchasing power, because that was day one, $1 bought you $1 worth of stuff. Okay, then we went through World War I and II, and at the end of World War II, 1944, they pegged the US dollar to gold, so all of the US dollars were backed by gold, and Bretton Woods was a conference where they said the US dollar is now the world's reserve currency, and all of the dollars around the globe will be pegged to the US dollar. So through the US dollar, all currencies were on a gold standard. You follow me so far? And here's the thing, because the currency is backed by gold, this is now called what's called an inelastic money supply. So you know what an elastic is? An elastic is you can stretch it. You can stretch it, it rebounds back. All right? So when you're pegged to gold, if you want to create more money, you cannot print more money unless you put more gold in the vault. So if you want to create $1 million worth of new currency, you need to put $1 million worth of that gold in the vault against which to print that currency. And that system ran really well right up to 1971, but the U.S. had a problem. They became the world's U.S. currency, everybody was pegged to it, and the reason why the world agreed to do this, because it was said that the U.S. dollar is as good as gold, and if France didn't want U.S. dollars, they could freely exchange those U.S. dollars for gold bars and say, okay, it's safe, it's guaranteed, no problem. The whole world agreed to it. Well, you know, what happened? 69, 68, 69, 70, the U.S. is in a war with Vietnam. It cost them way more money than they had. They outstripped their resources. They didn't have any cash. And so Nixon, and basically as they fired up their printing press without putting any more gold in the vault, all the nations around the globe started claiming their gold back, starting with France. They said, we want our gold. And they said, we got a problem. There's a run on the bank here. They weren't taking the cash, they were taking the gold. And so they put a stop to it. They put no, we will no longer convert to gold anymore. And in 1971, August 17th, Nixon pulled the gold standard and took us off of that. And from August 15, 1971 to today, we have been a fully freely floating fiat currency backed by absolutely nothing, and they have been printing and printing and printing and printing. And if you look at this, I'm going to show you another slide. So in 1971, we go off the gold standard, and all of a sudden you see this massive slide in the purchasing power, and it strokes out to 20. Now this graphic only shows us to 2013, but I promise you it continues to go on a downward slant all the way through 2019. So what happened in 2008? That was the global financial crisis, right? That's when the markets crashed, okay? And we had a big problem. The banks were all insolvent. And in fact, one of the guys from the Treasury is on, I got a YouTube video on. He came out, he says, listen, there was a run on the banks. They were literally pulling out $1 trillion an hour, and the whole financial system was within 2 hours of collapsing globally. So that's when they cooked up, okay, we need quantitative. They couldn't call it money printing because that would be unpalatable. So they gave it a fancy name and called it quantitative easing. All quantitative easing means we're going to print more money. And so from 2008, when this happened, they cranked up that printing press. They bailed out all the banks that were insolvent. Okay, went to Jamie Dimon and Bank of America and J.P. Morgan and all these other guys, and they started printing this cash. Now here's what happened. In 2008, there was exactly $825 billion in circulation. This is a big number to understand. $825 billion in circulation. We had the crash. We had the insolvency of the banks. They had to bail out the global financial system, and the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of China, the Bank of Japan, they all basically started cranking out these dollars. Now, I'm only going to look at the U.S. for this example. I got charts for every country, including Canada. Okay? In 2008, at the time of the crisis, there were $825 billion in circulation, which was plenty to float the global economy. It ran just fine on those 825. But we had the crash. They needed to bail out the banks, which were all ready to go bankrupt. And from 2008 to basically up to 2013, they printed $4.3 trillion. They quadrupled the amount of money in circulation. Now, here's what you need to understand. What gives them the right to print the money? What is the mechanism that allows them to do this? It was, well, they just print it. No, this is not how it works. And this is critical to understand. Like, it's just so, if you pay attention to anything I say to you today, pay attention to this. Okay, this is important. It's really important. Okay, so the Federal Reserve is it's not a federal institution. It is a private bank headquartered in Puerto Rico on private land, and it doesn't even report to the U.S. government. Now, don't take my word for it. You ever heard the expression hiding in plain sight? It's one of those things that's hiding in plain. It's so preposterous that nobody wants to believe it. And when you hear it for the first thing, the guy's nuts. I'm not nuts. They'll tell you that if you just go to their website. They'll tell you all of this. It hides in plain sight. Okay, so the Fed starts cranking this up. But they can't just print money. How do they print the money? Well, in the Canadian government, the U.S. government, the European Parliament, the Bank of Japan, the Japanese government, all of them. Every government has a Treasury Department. Now, that is a government institution. So there's a Treasury Department, and there is the Ministry of Financial Institutions. I'm going to tie all this together at the very end. So what happens is we need money. We got to bail out the system. So the Federal Reserve says to the government, we need to create cash. So what do? So the Treasury Department issues bonds and Treasury bills. Now, we've all heard of Treasury bills. Every week there's a Treasury bill auction, and we've all heard of bonds. Let me just ask you this rhetorically, and if you know the answer, just tell me. What is a bond and a T-bill? It's a debt, yeah. It is basically a promise to repay in the future. So basically, here's what happens. The Treasury Department opens up the window, issues $1 billion in bonds and T-bills, which are debt instruments, which is why if you look at a U.S. dollar now, it doesn't say U.S. dollar, it says Federal Reserve note. What is a note? If I have a note between you and me, what is a note? It is a promise to pay. It's also a unit of debt, which means this is a unit of debt. So here's how, follow the logic now. This is so critical, okay? So they open up the window, they go to the Treasury Department, we say, we need cash, how much do you want? We want $1 trillion today. So the Fed, or the Treasury Department, issues $1 trillion in Treasury notes. 2-year, 10-year, 30-year notes. The Fed takes it in, holds it as an asset, and prints the cash from it. What this means is that they have just printed money that didn't exist 10 minutes ago. It cost them nothing to print it. They basically put an interest payment on it, which basically means they printed it from nothing. They charged interest on something that didn't even exist, so they didn't even loan it to you. They printed it from nothing and then loaned it back to the government. And what gave the government to do this? The reason why the government can issue these treasury notes is because all of us, the taxpayers, our signatures are promises to repay government debt. So even when you're thinking, well, the government did it, it's not my problem. No, it's your problem. Because every time they issue a new batch of treasury bills, they've issued new debt to which you and me and all of our future kids have to pay back. And you have to understand that this never existed in the first place. Now, they have just issued $1 trillion of these new T-bills that have interest-bearing notes on them. And then the time to pay. But because this money never existed before, how do we pay it back? Well, we issue more T-bills so we can print more money to pay the interest on the money that never existed in the first place. And now the size of the debt is double. You get how this works? Which means that every new unit of currency is a brand new unit of debt, which is why we're drowning in debt. And when I tell you that we took the money supply from $825 billion to $3 trillion, $4 trillion, it means that's how much more debt we added, not even taking in the government deficit. I'll just show you what the Canadian number was. In 2008, the Canadian money in circulation was, today it's $1.5 trillion. We have times it by 5. This nation is in debt. Which means, as the citizens of this nation, we are also all in debt because we're the ones responsible for what the government did. Now, this is not an anti-government presentation. You need to understand this presentation. You follow me so far? All right. I get a little wound up. I'm passionate about this. But it's not wound up. I mean, listen, what I'm so passionate about is helping others understand what I understand so you can maybe do what I did. Maybe to a larger degree, maybe to a lesser degree, but you got to do something. You follow me? This is why I do this. This is why we're here. This is a presentation I love. Now, I want to take those two charts and I want to lay them over each other. So I showed you, the Federal Reserve established in 1913, and the value of the dollar, the purchasing power is going down. And in 2008, they cranked up that printing press. Now, just look at this. Look at this. If this line went all the way up to 1913, it's a flat line. It's a flat line. Where does it start rising? In 1971. What happened in 1971? We went off the gold standard, and that's when they started printing this stuff. Boom! Like a hockey stick. What happened here? 1944. It's 1971. These two curves are going exactly the same way. It's just that simple, folks. This is why our paychecks don't go as far. This is why our carts are getting, we call it shrinkflation. So sometimes they don't even reduce the price of the goods. They just reduce the size of the package, but that's still inflation. Inflation is a reduction in your purchasing power. In other words, what they do is they confiscate your wealth through the introduction of new money supply. That's going to be an important thing to remember, that one statement right there. I'm going to connect this dot for you in about 10 minutes. All right? It's really critical that you get this. Now, I want to talk about inflation for a second. I really want to drive this point home. Inflation is not an increase in price. Inflation, the increase in price is the symptom. So what is inflation? Okay. So inflation is the noun form of the verb to inflate. So what does it mean to inflate something? Well, the Webster Dictionary definition is to enlarge by a large or excessive amount. So what are some things that we can inflate? Well, I can inflate my daughter's birthday. Well, I don't have a daughter. I'd do it for Greg's daughter. And I have. I've actually blown up birthday balloons for her. But I can take a birthday balloon and I can blow it up. I'm going to inflate the balloon. If I give that thing one breath too many, sooner or later, bang! I can inflate I'm a bicyclist. I'm a road cyclist. And every time I go off a ride, I have to inflate my tire, and I have to look at the gauge on that thing, because if I give that thing one pump too many, boom! I'm going to blow the tire right off the rim. Well, what they've done with all this money supply is they are inflating our currency, which is decreasing its purchasing power. Is that dot connected now? Does everybody understand that? It's really critical that you understand this, or nothing else of this makes sense. All right, so that's what's going on. Yeah, boom, there you go. All right, now, they're basically creating $1 trillion of brand new debt every single year. They're basically creating $1 trillion of debt every year just on the budgetary deficit. They're creating another $1 trillion of debt every year on increasing the money supply. So it's basically a $2 trillion increase in debt every single year. Now, in 2016, they all stopped, except for the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank is still pumping out 80 trillion a month. 80 trillion a month. And they've been doing it since 2008. That's like 10 years. It's 11 years. Just think about it. Just think about it. All right, so you got that. Well, Federal Reserve quit printing money in 2016. They say they're going to unwind the balance sheet. But here's what happened 6 weeks ago. And I'm going to talk about the repo markets at the end of this. I want to be, listen, I got to be respectful of time. I'm so passionate about this, of helping people really understand it, okay? Because it's there's a lot of moving parts here. It's like a Swiss Army knife. You don't want to open all the blades at the same time or you can't use any of them. So we're going to take this piece by piece, okay? So the Federal Reserve cut it back in 2016, but they still had all this debt, and they were still doing treasury auctions every single month, and they were still increasing the debt, but not to the tune of 80 trillion a month, okay? Or 80 billion a month, sorry. Okay, 80 billion is a big difference, okay? But about 2 months ago, basically the whole system went unstable again. And so we've all, I mean, if you've been reading the papers, you watch the news, they talk about the repo market. Oh, we got a problem in the repo market. But the majority of people, they know that means there's something not right going on, but very few dig in to figure out what that is. Okay, what is this? When I hear the word repo, to me that means you missed a car payment and they're coming to take it back. That's not what this means. The repo market is called the repurchase market, and for over 100 years, well, for thousands of years, what happens is the banks will basically lend money to each other on overnight term. So they put a small little interest rate on it, and Bank A will lend to Bank B, and then Bank B will pay it back tomorrow to get through their overnight liquidity issues. About 2 months ago, all the banks quit lending to each other, and the whole system ground to a halt. There was a credit freeze. Very few of us felt it in the natural, but what happened is if that would have continued for 2 or 3 days, the whole system would have crushed down. All of the banks would have been shut, all the ATM machines would have shut down because the banks were illiquid and they wouldn't trust. Now here's, when they went in and said, why? It's because the banks didn't trust each other anymore. We've all heard about the problems at Deutsche Bank, listen, they're all insolvent, including the Canadian chartered banks. And I'll talk about that if I have time later, all right? The whole system froze. So the Fed said, oh no, we'll never do QE again, but we're going to intervene in the repo market. What did that mean? They went to the Treasury, said, print us up $1 trillion. The Treasury issued $1 trillion of the bonds and T-bills, gave it to the Fed. The Fed printed a brand new trillion and bailed out the banks. So it basically, in effect, what we got is a bailout to the banks, and it's happening every month. Every night, they're injecting somewhere between 800 billion and 1.2 trillion every single night, and they've been doing it for 2 months, and no one's talking about it. Why aren't they talking about it? Because they don't want you to understand this. This system is so unstable and so insolvent that it's teetering. And we are going to see, I promise you, there will be, and I'm not promising you because I want to see this come to pass. In fact, God knows, I hope that I am wrong. And I am not ruled by a spirit of fear. No. Great hope, courage, sound love, sound mind, and love. I buy those, okay? But the problem is, okay, I think I'm going to be right about this. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. The banks are unstable, and I think we're going to see something of a much greater magnitude of what we ever saw in 1929. And if you go back and just study the history of money, there have always been these cycle resets where the monetary system changed. Before the US dollar was the world's reserve currency, most of us weren't around, but it was the British pound, the pound sterling. Why did they lose the status? Because they stopped backing it with sterling, started printing it. Am I getting a signal? What's my signal? I got 5 minutes? All right, I'm going to go really fast, okay? I got to be done. All right. I think you're getting the picture. I'm going to give you one more slide on this, and then I'm going to show you something real quick, and then I'm just going to get out of the way, okay? I want you to understand the magnitude of this money. We've all heard the expression, if time were money. Well, time's not money. I mean, time is a resource that we have against which we can apply our labors to earn some cash. But if time were money, because we can understand that, all right? But we can all understand an hour. Like if I say to you an hour, you can picture an hour. If I say to you a year, you can picture a year. But if I say to you $1 trillion, it's really hard to picture that. I want to show you what this looks like. If time were money, okay? So 100,000 seconds. So how do we count money? So just think in banker terms. 100,000, million, 100 million, billion, trillion. Those are the increments, right? Watch this. 100,000 seconds is 1 day. 1 million seconds jumps to 11 days. It's a pretty good jump. 1 billion seconds goes from 11 days to 32 years. These are real numbers. You can calculate this yourself. 60 seconds to an hour, just backward planet. All right? A trillion seconds goes from 32 years to 32,000 years. And this is how much money they're printing and injecting into the system every single night. And now that you understand what inflation is, it's a reduction of your purchasing power because they print more of this cash with nothing behind it. The more they print, each unit is worth less. So why have we not seen massive hyperinflation yet? Here's why. Because United States today, so I'm going to go off script here. I'm not even going to show you the rest of the slides because I got 3 minutes to do this. But I want you to catch this. The reason why we have not seen this massive hyperinflation like they got going on in Venezuela right now, like they got going on down in Argentina, like we got going on in Cyprus and Greece, the reason why we haven't seen it in Canada and the United States yet is because of this thing called the petrodollar. See, here's what happened. Nixon took everybody off the gold standard in '71, and every nation on the planet said, we want our gold back. We don't trust your currency anymore. And Nixon said, we'll no longer convert for gold, and he put a stop on it. And there was going to be a war over this. So they have to cook up a new way. They had to cook up a new way to get the whole world to accept dollars. Well, the world was growing, and oil demand was on the rise. In fact, I'm just going to put up one slide as I do this. Give me the liberty of this. Just boom, 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 boom. I'm going to fast forward real quick here. Oh man, there's some good stuff here. I'm going to have to do a video for you guys. Okay? And it'll be more succinct, but okay. Here's what happened. So 1971, nobody wanted the US dollar anymore. Remember, we, Canada, are tied to it. We're tied to it. We're tied to it. All right, so how do they get us to buy this? So okay, they cooked up, hey, we got it. You've heard oil called black gold? This is exactly why. So the dollar is no longer backed by gold. It's not even backed by oil. But here's what they did. They cooked up, they went to OPEC, who was supplying the global markets with oil. And they said, I'll tell you what, if you'll agree to sell your oil only for dollars, you will not accept rubles, you will not accept yuan, you will not accept pesos, you take only dollars, we'll protect your oil fields and we'll give you military cover at our expense. So our taxpayer dollars put our jets, our bombs, our troops, our everything to cover their nations in exchange for them selling oil only in dollars. And what this allowed them to do, because oil consumption and oil demand was on the rise, as demand for oil went through the roof, demand for dollars went through the roof because they could only buy it. So the United States was able to crank up the printing press and print all these dollars and export the inflation to all the other nations of the world, which is why we've been able to keep a relatively decent cost of living. Now here's the converging trend. So here's how it works. All right. Demand for oil goes up, means demand for dollars goes up, means inflation stays relatively low, and our livelihood, our lifestyle is pretty good. But what's happened, and this is one of the converging trends, and the news isn't telling you, but because BNN isn't saying it doesn't mean it's not happening. The BRICS nation, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and a host of others, about 25 nations that actually represent 30% of the global GDP, have all walked away from the US dollar. They won't touch it anymore. 30% of global GDP will no longer touch US dollars. They won't trade in it. They've all got bilateral trade agreements going on. So the demand for those dollars is gone. The whole oil for dollars thing is falling apart. All the OPEC nations, Saudi Arabia, they're beginning to accept non-US dollars for oil, which basically means because once you print these dollars, you cannot unprint them. They're still all circulating and they're all sitting in foreign lands. But now that nobody's touching them and nobody wants them, they're all going back to whence they came. And when they hit the US shores, whoa, hyperinflation goes through the roof. And this is what you need to understand, that the day of this happening is it's upon us. Now I just want to give you one quick metaphor, okay? We all know when a tsunami comes into shore, when a big wave comes on, there is always an event that triggered it. The triggering event always happens before you see the wave coming on shore is the symptom. The tsunami is the symptom. The triggering event was the earthquake that happened a week ago out there. So put that back into time as money, put that back into time frames. The tsunami is here. We just haven't seen it, but the triggering events are all taking place. The BRICS have all walked off the US dollar. The Bank of, and I printed several headlines just from the last week. Bank of Sweden, Central Bank of Sweden, outlines its plan for a digital crypto national currency. The BRICS nations have outlined their plan to go off the US system and out of the SWIFT system. They're all rejecting the US dollar. OPEC is now swapping oil contracts for gold. I was going to give you some slides on the value of gold. Suffice it to say, I calculated this morning. Give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay? Without pulling up slides and giving you the visuals on this, okay? If you put $100,000 into gold back in 1932 when they created the Federal Reserve, that gold today would be worth $7,672,000. Okay? Now everybody looks at gold and says, oh, gold isn't money. Look, it hasn't done anything. It's been 1,200, 1,200, 1,200, 1,200. Okay, we've had this little bump. It's gone from 1,200, maybe it's at 1,400 today. Listen, there's two problems with this. Everybody looks at gold in U.S. dollars and think it's done nothing. You have to look at gold through the lens of the currency you exchange in. This is one of the greatest swindles that they've placed on us, because while they're telling us gold is worth nothing, all the central banks are buying massive hordes of it. China has accumulated 200 tons. I calculated that this afternoon. 200 tons times 2,000 pounds is 2,000 pounds times 16 ounces a pound times 1,500 U.S. an ounce. That's 9 trillion. China's sitting on $9 trillion worth of physical gold right now, 9.6 actually. Russia has exactly half of that. Argentina has the same quantity, Brazil. So if this is worth nothing, why are they all making massive accumulations of gold? Because if you follow the history of money, they always start on they're backed by something, and then they're backed by nothing. They inflate them to nothing, and then the system crashes, there's a reset, and they come out with a brand new gold-backed currency. Now, I think the next one's going to be digital. It'll be a digital currency, but I'm absolutely convinced that it'll be backed by gold, because every central bank on the planet is buying hordes of this stuff. If the banks are buying it and we don't trust the banks, what should we be doing? Buying some gold. And what Karatbars has done is they've made it available to the masses in small increments so you can buy it a couple of cents at a time, a couple of dollars at a time, and by digitizing it, they have taken all the inconvenience away from trying to use it. We have an inflation-proof money, because when you put your money in gold, no matter the form, you stop inflation dead in its tracks.